I just have to start off by saying I am so excited to be here that I even put curls on in my hair and put on a blazer. That's how excited I am to be here today. But don't be fooled. The bottom half of this pantsuit is yoga pants and slippers. So the joy of, getting to do events like this, in isolation, basically. A little bit about me, like Marwan shared, my name is Sheena Brady, and I'm the founder of Tease Tea and the Founders Fund. I also work in leadership at Shopify. I've lived in many, many places throughout my life, but Ottawa has been home for over half a decade now. And for the last few years, I definitely think a lot about who I am and what has influenced who I am today. And in this moment, I'm going to invite you all to do the exact same thing. So in your little chat box below, I would love it if you could type but not send. When you were little, what did you want to be when you grew up? So just type it in, but don't hit send yet, because when I say send, we'll send and we'll get, an incredible flurry of responses. So I'll give you all a few seconds to go ahead and type that in. So in 3, 2, 1. Let's hit send.
Oh, wow. They're flooding in, Sheena. Ballet
Amazing.
Dancer, dentist, artist, a professional athlete, astronaut, hockey player, lots of athletic people, a mermaid. Love it. Love it. Concert pianist. There's a lot. Mailman. That's hilarious, Jerome.
I love it. We have so many big dreamers here this morning. When I was a little girl, I'm going to be honest, I had no idea what I wanted to be when I grew up. You know that whole saying, you can't be what you can't see. I do genuinely feel like my complicated upbringing influenced that. That is, of course, with the exception of being a Spice Girl. I'm sure we've got a lot of 90s people here today. I was actually born in 87, but I definitely allocated a lot of my 90s being obsessed with the Spice Girls. There was something just like super powerful about that empowering girl power era that they brought to the pop culture scene. But with the exception of being a Spice Girl, I honestly didn't know what I wanted to be. Like I said, I had a bit of a complicated upbringing. I moved around so many times that I've honestly lost count. I went to 3 different elementary schools. I grew up in a single parent household with my sister, and our lives were very complicated. My mom had me at the young age of 17, and she chose to have me instead of finishing high school. And it was very difficult at times. And, I don't fault my mom. In fact, she's definitely a strong role model of mine today, because I genuinely believe that she did everything she could with what she knew and what she had access to at the time. And because she had me at such a young age, at 17, we were both growing up at the same time in a lot of ways. I was growing up through childhood, and she was growing up through adulthood at the exact same time. I want to also just go back a little bit here to this, this question about what did you want to be when you grew up? And also think about who you are today. What are some things that might have influenced that? You don't need to put it in the chat box or anything, but just maybe think about that. Actually, you know what? Let's just put it in the chat box. Let's go ahead and do that. What are some things that influenced who you are today? So we'll take a quick minute to type that in. And then again, Maxine, if you wouldn't mind, once I say hit send, if you could read some of those out, that would be incredible.
Oh, lots of family member, my dad, my lovely girlfriend, glitter glue. That's Amber for you. Friends, school, teacher, parents, studying abroad, my mom, another travel abroad, CreativeMornings Ottawa. That's really sweet. Making videos with my brother.
Amazing. So many great responses here. So a lot of common threads here: a supportive family and environment, access to education, perhaps access to networks like CreativeMornings, or perhaps some other privileges, right? These are definitely the types of things that have helped influence who we are today. And so even though I had a bit of a complicated upbringing, I didn't really have access to these things, like access to education, a supportive family environment. But I knew that I always could try to do better. And when I went through high school, again, fun fact, I went to 3 different high schools. I also did grade 9 math 3 times. That's another fun fact. But I actually became the first person in my family to go to and graduate high school. And so when you look at my my family history and translate that into data points, it's pretty black and white to connect the dots and realize that I probably wasn't going to be, destined to do big or ambitious things. And when I graduated high school, I did what everyone does. They fantasize, well, what's next? And so my high school sweetheart and I, at the time, we were thinking about what our future was going to look like, except I knew my reality. I knew that because I didn't have a lot of money, and an important detail I forgot to mention a moment ago is that my mom actually took the risk to to be an entrepreneur and open a home salon, only to struggle with bankruptcy a few short years later. And that also, elevated the struggle that we went through during a certain point growing up. And I also developed a very unhealthy relationship with debt after seeing what debt did to my mom. And so when I graduated from high school, I knew that I would probably have to take a year off, work, save some money, and then go to school. But there was a woman in my life at that time, my high school sweetheart's mom, actually, who was basically a second mom to me in a lot of ways. And she made me feel like I had a home at times where I didn't feel safe. And so when I graduated high school, and she knew, my history and my upbringing, and I was explaining to her how I was going to take a year off, Louise Rose was having none of that. Louise knew that if I took a year off from high school, a year off after high school, it'd be unlikely that I would ever go to college at all. And so with her family's own limited budget, she scraped whatever money she could to pay for my first year of education. And I was absolutely floored, because up until that point in my life, nobody had ever invested in my potential like that. Not only was I floored, but I was incredibly confused. And I asked Louise, why are you doing this? Why are you spending what little extra money your family has on me and my education? And I was expecting some big, complicated or inspiring answer. And instead she said, because why not you? And so I carried that audacity and that attitude with me for the rest of my young adulthood and throughout my career. And so I not only became the first person in my family to go to and graduate from high school, but I became the first person to even go to college and graduate from college. Now, that wasn't without its challenges as well. In fact, the first program I took, ironically in business at Algonquin College, I dropped out. This led me on a journey to work abroad for a little bit at a restaurant, where I realized I'm actually good at this hospitality thing. I want to go back to school for hospitality. The second time I went back to college, I went to and graduated from Algonquin College right here in Ottawa in hospitality management. But what does it mean to start over? The beautiful thing about starting from zero, which I've honestly started over so many times in my life, I've lost count at this point. But the beautiful thing about starting over is that you can only go up. Endings are always necessary to create new beginnings. And the best secret about starting over is that we always have a choice. Even when it seems there's literally no way ever, it's absolutely possible that we can do anything to change our circumstances, we actually can. We all have the ability to rewrite the script in our mind that says life is happening to us, and instead say, but with that, power also lies within us. And so I worked for about a decade in hospitality. And I don't know if any of you have ever worked in the hospitality industry before, but it is an incredibly demanding industry. You work very demanding hours. It takes a toll on your physical and mental health in a lot of ways, because you are bending over backwards to go above and beyond for guests basically strangers, right? And particularly in hospitality leadership, which is where I spent most of my career in hospitality, it was incredibly demanding, and I worked on a short week, 60 hours per week. It was a lot. But I felt, okay, I am also very privileged. Here's this thing that I went to school for, that I'm now getting paid pretty well to do in leadership and hospitality. But inside, I was feeling miserable for a very long time. It was only towards the end of my hospitality career, which I ended up actually getting fired at the height of my career in hospitality. And that was absolutely devastating, because here I had spent blood, sweat, and tears and money into an industry that had made me feel disposable in an instant. But right before I got let go, I would say about 3 months or so, I had started a tea company while I was working in hospitality in this demanding industry. The reason I started this tea company is because I actually became a certified tea sommelier when I was asked to build the biggest tea program in Toronto. You guys, I didn't even drink tea at the time. But why not me? Why couldn't I build the biggest tea program in Toronto? And so that's where I became a certified tea sommelier. Believe it or not, that's a real thing. And I developed and executed the biggest tea program in all of Toronto at the Shangri-La Hotel. And what I didn't expect was to be incredibly inspired by the world of tea. It was like this passion that just kind of took off in my mid-20s. And that's when I decided to combine that passion with purpose and start Tease Tea. And Tease Tea has been a social impact company from day one. And I'll kind of go into what that means in a little bit. But when I got fired from that hotel, I think most logical people in my position would probably just get another hospitality job, right? Because that's the thing that you have experience in, that's the thing you went to school for. But I knew my life wasn't working for me. I had not developed any strong relationships or friendships. In fact, I was in a failing personal relationship that ended around the same time after 4.5 years. And I had no relationship with my family. So I knew I needed to do something different, but I also knew that this little tea company was a beautiful creative outlet that really sparked so much joy. And so I thought, well, I don't have any money to really go in on this full time, so I'm going to find another job that'll at least be supportive of this business. And that's where I started at Shopify. So I started at Shopify, which is basically a company that helps to, I'm sure everyone knows what Shopify is because most of us here from Ottawa, but I will explain. Shopify is basically a powerful software solution to help power your e-commerce store and your POS solutions for in-store. And so, of course, my store is on Shopify. My website is on Shopify. And I started at Shopify as a guru, which is an entry-level role. It's basically tech support. So if you ever had a problem with your website, you would call that 1-800 number, and it was someone like me on the other end walking you through your challenges. This was supposed to be a temporary gig, just stick around long enough to bankroll my business and then, go on and build this big, massive tea empire. But I ended up finding so much fulfillment in my work at Shopify. I also was supporting entrepreneurs every single day, right? Whether it was helping them with their website banner or helping them with their navigation menu, whatever it was, I was seeing these entrepreneurs who were arguably, in many cases, underdogs themselves, who were able to overcome incredible adversity and brave enough to put their business and their passion out there to sell online. And I thought, well, if they can do this successfully, why can't I? Let's take a quick moment here. Again, I want you to all put in the chat box. Again, don't hit send right away. But what has made you feel like an underdog at times? So go ahead and type it in. Like maybe, it's your lack of access to network, whatever the things are that are coming to mind, just go ahead and type them in. And then again, Maxine, I will ask you to read them out and we'll go ahead and hit send.
So being a woman, not having an advanced degree, excuse me, being self-taught, the workplace, imposter syndrome, education, being curvy, poverty, lack of access to launch boards like credit and programming, seniority, being a parent at 16, questioning my own experiences and expertise, lack of funds, and a lot of imposter syndrome, relate to that for sure. Lack of qualifications, lots of great stuff here. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you everyone for sharing. Those are all very powerful responses. And I'm going to tie in this all into the story, which you might all be, or many of you familiar with, the story of David and Goliath, that analogy. And I'm going to take this excerpt specifically from Malcolm Gladwell's book. So again, you probably know the biblical story of David and Goliath. There's a small shepherd boy, and he defeats this massive and mighty warrior thanks to his wits and a carefully aimed shot from his trusty sling. And this tale is often told as an example of how underdogs can prevail even in the face of overwhelming odds. But I want to ask you all something. Was David actually the underdog in that battle in the Valley of Elah? In my opinion, not really, if you think about it. Because you see, this sling is actually a very potent weapon, capable of flinging stones at opponents at devastating speeds from distances well out of his sword's reach. And David, let's be real, he was obviously no rookie with this weapon because he frequently had to defend his sheep against predators with that very same slingshot. He basically got his 10,000 hours in before this battle. Goliath's massive size was probably also likely due to a medical condition that one can assume that might have made his vision a little bit blurry too. So he had a bit of a disadvantage. So in fact, Goliath probably never even stood a chance. David knocked him out with a single stone and then gloriously chopped off his head using the giant's own sword. But what happened here? Did being underestimated end up becoming David's biggest advantage? Is it possible that David simply stood up to Goliath when he probably said something like, "You can't defeat me," only to have David respond while using his trusty slingshot, "Hey man, why not me?" So anyone can jump into entrepreneurship, but let's be serious for a second. Underdogs are resilient and resourceful AF. If there is anything I have learned during my early days as a guru, like I said, underdogs make exceptional entrepreneurs. In my early days at Shopify, I was working 7-8 hours a day, just helping support our merchants become a little stronger and a little better with every website challenge they were able to tackle and overcome. Most of them didn't even come from a shred of e-commerce experience, but they showed up ready to get a little bit better with their business every single day. So we talked a little bit earlier about what it means to be an underdog. And so for me, as you've probably connected the dots by now, for me, it was growing up with very few role models, growing up in a very poor socioeconomic status, a lack of a support system. The only constant in my life for years being change and starting over again and again and again. Like I said, I even did grade 9 math 3 times. Am I really the most qualified to be running a business? But in spite of that, with this little tea company, I always had bigger dreams for it. If anything, supporting these merchants as a guru was wildly motivating. Because like I said, if many of them could navigate the roller coaster of being an entrepreneur and come out on top in many cases, why couldn't I? Why not me? And so with that, I'm incredibly proud and humbled to share that established back in 2013 during one of the most difficult periods of my life, Tease Tea is now a 7-figure company with customers in over 30 countries. And to date, we have contributed over $150,000 in product and financial support to programs that are dedicated to empowering the lives and businesses of women. This also includes our very own Founders Fund, which first started as a give back program under Tease Tea. It's now its own social impact company supporting hundreds of underrepresented women entrepreneurs across the country. We've created, in my opinion, arguably the only community and business accelerator to support women who don't fit in the box, women who don't fit in the traditional pantsuit, women that are traditionally considered bad for business and may identify as underdogs themselves. And that guru role at Shopify that was supposed to be a short-term gig, over half a decade later, I am still at Shopify and loving it. However, I now continue to own my craft and leadership at Shopify. Throughout this entire journey, I've also started one of the best and most challenging yet rewarding jobs I've ever had in my life. And that's when I became a mother 2 years ago to my daughter, Camellia. Another fun fact for you, she's named after the species of plant that produces tea. And she reminds me every single day what I am capable of. And I will continue to do the same for her. Technically, what I've just shared with you is a very high level personal underdog story. And maybe some of you are impressed and maybe a little inspired, and I can even stop this talk right here. But what good is inspiration without some takeaways to help you navigate your own challenges? So that if you feel at times that you are the underdog, you can not only survive, but thrive. So that you can live those powerful moments of, why not me? Here's the secret sauce. There is no secret sauce, just action. This is a beautiful quote from one of my peer mentors and dear friends, Vivian Kay. So there's no secret to this success. It's consistent action. And I'm going to get into what that means in a moment. So here are the top 3 things I want you to think about if you are ever feeling like the underdog. Systems are greater than goals. Underdogs know that systems are more important than goals. And because let's be serious, goals are just the end result, right? Goals are just the thing you want to strive for. But goals are absolutely useless if you don't have the systems in place to get there. So goal-oriented people exist in this state of continuous pre-success failure at best and permanent failure at worst if things never work out. Because like I said, goals are just the desired end result. But underdogs are generally systems-focused people. And systems-focused people succeed every time they apply their systems in the sense that they did what they intended to do. And so for me, what that meant when I was creating my systems for success was, first of all, finding a day job that was supportive of my creative outlet. Because I am very privileged to work at a company that empowers internal entrepreneurs. And I fully recognize that many corporations are not. And I think if I had stayed in the hospitality industry, my tea company wouldn't be where it is today. So that is something that I knew was key to my success, is having a day job that supported my side hustle. And I worked 11 to 7 in those early days at Shopify so that I could work 7 to 11 just on my business. Did they make for long days? Yes. Did they make for painful days? Yes. Did they make for exhausting days? Yes. But it was important that I set up that system and was consistent with it and put the hard work in every single day. Now, don't get me wrong. There were days where I didn't want to do that, where I only wanted to show up for my day job because I was so exhausted. But I always made a commitment to myself that every single day I will do at least one thing for my business. Even if that's just a social media post, even if it's just a tweet, even if it's just a newsletter, I will always do at least one thing, because one thing is better than nothing. And it's when you do nothing that starts to create the habit of doing nothing, and therefore failure. I also want to talk about a bit of this book that I love by James Clear, and it's called Atomic Habits. Anyone that's looking to create systems in their life, this is an incredible book. It's a great read, easy read. I highly recommend it. It's been transformational and a good reminder for me in the last year of just how important systems are. But there's this one key takeaway in James Clear's book called The Plateau of Latent Potential. And this graph is incredible because it applies to so many things. It can apply to losing weight, starting yoga, trying to work out more. Whatever it is you're trying to do, you can apply this graph to it. And basically what it is you have the yellow arrow that is your expectations of what should happen. You have these reasonable expectations that you should see this like steady growth over time. But the orange arrow is what actually happens. It takes a lot longer to see results than we want. And so you're stuck in this little gap called the valley of disappointment. And because you're not seeing the results as quickly as you want, you give up right before you're about to see massive growth. And I am going to transparently share with you on this next graph some financials at TST, which I don't do often because I really want to walk the walk and show you just how much this applies to pretty much everything. This is TST's revenue as a side hustle in its first 5 years. Isn't it incredible how close it is to that previous graph? I have what I thought would happen and then what actually happened. It was a grind. I was not paying myself for years. Every dollar I made went back into the company. Fortunately, of course, I had my day job to help support, pay the bills. But don't get me wrong, and let me be clear, there were many moments in that valley of disappointment that I wanted to give up. But I stuck with it, I stayed consistent, and then you see that hockey stick growth. It took me 5 years to become an overnight success. So be relentless in your dreams, in your goals. Don't give up, because that hockey stick might just be around the corner. If you're wondering what the heck is a hockey stick, I think this looks like a hockey stick, my little graph there. So to wrap up on how I feel about this first point about systems, systems are basically habits, and habits are the compound interest of self-improvement. So the second thing, underdogs use being underestimated as their secret weapon or as their slingshot. You don't even know how many times I've been underestimated in many rooms that I've been in. Oftentimes I look like the younger person in the room. It's not taken as seriously, with the exception of today wearing this blazer for you all. I don't usually, wear professional suits. So I have been at the biggest trade shows, or the biggest events, even, where I'm a speaker before I'm about to get up on stage. I have heard it all, especially along the lines of people who unintentionally are practicing unconscious bias and don't even realize the power of their words. But I've been told, what a fun hobby I have. You're too late to make any money in this business. This is a quote from a former CEO of one of the biggest tea companies in the world. I happen to have had at one point a tea store in every shopping mall in Canada. I'm not going to name names, but you can probably figure out who that is. What makes you qualified to run this business? Has a man ever been asked that? My favorite is going to trade shows, and this has happened so many times, where people walk by and they look at my brand, which I believe is beautiful and polished, and this response is basically a reflection of that. But I've had people say, "Oh, what's it like being a rep at this company? My friend is a rep at this company." I have been misunderstood for a multi-level marketing company and being a rep for one so many times. And when I correct them and I say, actually, I'm the founder and the CEO, and there are no reps at this company because we are not an MLM, so I don't think your friend works at my company. I know they don't intend to mean any harm, but I know they're a little bit embarrassed too for making that assumption. So when we talk about being underestimated, I'm going to tell you another story, and you all know this story. It's Steve Jobs' story. Steve was fired from Apple in 1985, the very company that he created. He was basically fired for being himself. He was betrayed by people he loved multiple times. And most devastatingly, he was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer in 2004. But after hearing probably the worst news of his entire life and having cancer, he came out with his best work, including the iPhone and the iPad. So when you are underestimated, number one, don't forget, it's easier to over-deliver because no one's thinking much of you to begin with. And number two, it's sensational to think that the worst events can bring out the best in us. And finally, last but not least, seek comfort in the unknown. This is the biggest thing that has gotten me through so many ruts and moments of feeling like an underdog. And it's easier said than done, but there are 3 takeaways within these 3 points that I think might help you navigate this yourself. Ask yourself, is this even a problem right now? Don't worry about problems that don't exist yet, people, because you are creating a state of analysis paralysis and going in a downward spiral, which is not good for your mental health and not good for your ability to execute. So if it's not a problem right now, don't make it one. Yeah, it might be a problem one day, but worry about it then. And then also ask yourself, what control do I even have over this? If you don't have a lot of control over any given situation in front of you, then try not to stress about it and try to seek comfort in the fact that you do not have much control. And instead, ask yourself, what do I have control over? Once you ask yourself that question, it is incredibly empowering what action can come from that. One incredibly important responsibility that we all have regardless if if you identify as an underdog or not. We all have to invest in ourselves and invest in the underdog. We all carry this responsibility to pay our success forward, and I fundamentally believe this. And there are 3 ways that you can invest in the underdog. The number 1, check your own privilege and your unconscious bias. Because when you do this, you realize that there are certain circumstances and privileges that brought you to where you are today that make your life and your battles a little bit easier than someone else. And let's be clear here, we all have privilege, every single one of us in some capacity. For some, it might be the color of our skin. For some, it might be the access to education. For some, it might be a supportive family. We all have a privilege, so check it. Also check your unconscious bias. So that example that I gave at the women at trade shows who I would be constantly underestimated by, when you are politely called out in a moment like that, where you've practiced unconscious bias, check yourself, reflect on that, because that might give you an opportunity to realize you're about to do it before you trip up again. And it's okay, because just like privilege, we all have unconscious bias. The next responsibility we have is that we all are responsible for advocating, nominating, and supporting and stepping up for the underdog. You know, there were many responses earlier that some felt being a woman was part of being an underdog. Some felt their skin color was a part of being an underdog. So if you see an opportunity that is great for someone, nominate them, sponsor them, mentor them, tap them on the shoulder and say, hey, I think you should go after this opportunity because you are exceptional at X. The confidence barrier is very, very real, and it's all of our responsibility to work together to help everyone overcome their own self-limiting beliefs. And finally, share your story. So if you have found yourself in a moment of unconscious bias, but checked yourself, or if you have been a part of stepping up to advocate and nominate and mentor someone as a small part of their success, if you have been an underdog where you have had a combination of success and failure or a little bit of both along the way, share your story, because it is only then that we can learn and grow and inspire one another to constantly do better and pay it forward. And last but not least in all of this today, never stop seeking belonging. I ran away from Ottawa for so many years. Like I said, I've started over in many cities, so many times I've actually lost count. But I'm so proud to have been in Ottawa for over half a decade, the place that I was technically born, the place where today I have grown roots, the place that I have found a sense of community, support, and belonging. And I was relentless for my entire life up until I turned 25 or 26 to find that. And I am so honored and privileged to have that sense of belonging today and the network that I have, and to be a part of events like this at Creative Morning, where it is their mission to help create this sense of belonging. The last thing I want you to leave with today, if you have goals, regardless of their size, believe and invest in your potential. Go all in and bet on yourself. Because when you bet on yourself, you give yourself permission to chase after your dreams. You may not always catch them, but at least you can take off your shoes at the end of the day knowing you gave it your best. And most importantly, and most simply, you should always bet on yourself, because why not you? Thank you. Amazing. So I see Therese. Thank you, Therese. So are there any strategies you've used when you temporarily lose confidence to pump yourself up? Yeah, definitely. 2 things. So the first thing is listening to my favorite music. Honestly, like I said, I mean it when I said I was supposed to be a Spice Girl. Like I got 10,000 hours of practice in just singing when I was a kid. So I like to amp myself up in the car with my music, and I sing to my favorite hype songs. Right now it's Lizzo, Like a Girl. Like that's my big one. Panic at the Disco, High Hopes. That's my other one. And I just like sing it like it's my job in my car. And it is like honestly my therapy. And there's nothing that gets me more hyped. that's probably not going to float everyone's boat. But the other thing that I do is I really rely heavily on my peer mentors. And, that's a big part of what we do at Founders Fund, is that we actually match people with peer mentor groups. But for my own peer mentor, they're like my ride and die. They are the people that I share my successes and celebrate them with, that some people might not understand outside of my entrepreneurial network. Like when I say, oh, I got a big purchase order, like some people, like my mom would be like, okay, cool. Like, what does that even mean? But with this person, they are like my cheerleader. They're my hype person. And same thing with the lows. When the lows are so, so painful, when that exact same purchase order became something to celebrate, becomes a nightmare that's crippled my entire cash flow for months, because I have to pay for the upfront manufacturing costs for all the everything that goes into the purchase order. I can talk to that same peer mentor, and they really help me to navigate like what I'm feeling. They remind me that like I'm still capable of getting through challenges. So yeah, my peer mentors are Vivian Kay, who I mentioned earlier, and Gregory McDonald, who is the owner of actually another local business called Bethorium, based in Canada, which is a successful e-commerce company as well. But those are my two ride or die peer mentors. And Amanda, who's here as well today, she's our COO at Founders Fund and TT. She's like my all-time hype woman, and she's someone that I definitely go to share everything I'm feeling safely, without a filter that's not pretty. So I think it's really important to have those people in your corner that you trust.
I think there's two questions. One, maybe you want to address quickly, is just the Founders Fund. Yes, the funding has been distributed already, but you can still join the Founders Fund with the discount code we offered to access all the resources, right?
And I see Amanda's here too. So Amanda, maybe you can link it. But basically the Founders Fund is, we're already halfway through our programming for the year, but we have access to over 50 recorded mentorship sessions that you can go through at your own leisure. A lot of the funding, for the main funding, has already been applied for by our founders. So to give you an idea of how it works, it's basically a membership model where more than half of your membership fee goes right into the pool of funding that you can actually apply for. But there'll be more opportunities for funding in the later summer as well. So you can have 50% off to actually just be able to enjoy the mentorship benefits, the future funding opportunities, and all kinds of other good stuff. One of my favorite things that we do at the Founders Fund is host daily roundtables to help break the isolation, which we've all been there as anybody who identifies as an entrepreneur. And we just show up every day as like a roundtable conversation and share what's on our mind. And I find that's a very powerful thing too, to have that sense of virtual community, especially during these times.
Yeah, what do you feel was the best personal trait you took away from the hospitality business? For me, it was to observe and anticipate people's needs.
Yeah, Corey, I couldn't agree more with that. That is a big one. And I actually fundamentally believe that everyone should work in hospitality, like at some point in their lives, because you become an incredibly well-rounded human in a lot of ways. So like Corey said, observe and anticipate people's needs. But for me, it was also developing an incredible backbone. Someone who has to take shit, for lack of better words, but still have a smile and still deliver an exceptional experience. That was like a really powerful thing to have learned how to do in my 20s, to be able to like control myself in those moments where, again, you're serving guests and they might be upset about their salad or their cocktail. And let's be serious, not all guests are as nice as other guests, and some are kind of mean. And it's your role when you're in hospitality to still show up and be kind and compassionate and empathetic, and still deliver an above and beyond experience in those moments. So that was a very powerful like takeaway that I still like embody today.
Much, Sheena. I'm totally fascinated by this whole idea of the systems thinker, and it brings to mind for me the experience I've had in linear environments with administrations, leadership, and watching other people in organizations that are maybe a little bit less outspoken, maybe a little bit more introverted. We have a ton of engineers, and Canada North's filled with engineers, not necessarily the ones to put their hand up and poke at someone, but they're very creative. Even our engineers, very, very creative people, but they're not necessarily the ones that are going to push the boundaries from the outside. They're doing it internally with their craft. But how do you I guess, how do you provide them with the support that they're looking for? What do you suggest they do to get that support when maybe at the top level, the executive side, that understanding maybe isn't there?
Yeah, it's actually such a very good question, especially working at Shopify. Like I hear that, like we have so many talented, intelligent engineers, like some of the most talented people I've ever worked with on this planet. But I hear you. And I think like that's where we all have that responsibility to be like, take our blinders off and be on the lookout for that as people who are a little bit more outspoken, and champion for those people and help amplify their voices. I think that that's our responsibility, number one, as people where might come a little bit more naturally to speak up. Like I'm the type of person that's not afraid to like, you know, honestly, I'm not afraid to slack like our CEO, Toby at Shopify. Like I'm not, like I have once, it's a story for another day about just something not really related to work, but I think some people are more comfortable than others to do that, right? And that's completely understandable. So we need to help amplify those voices. And for the person that's maybe a little bit more introverted, as you shared, I would just say that they raise their hand and they go to someone that they trust who is a little bit more confident and outspoken and ask for their support. Because I think like that's, you know, really a key part of my role in leadership at Shopify, is to make sure that the incredible work that the ICs are doing, the individual contributors that work with me, that their work gets seen, that it gets heard, and that it gets polished in a way that in some cases should be seen at a senior leadership or executive leadership level.
Thanks so much for that. It's the culture. It's crafting.
Yes, it's the culture.
Developing that culture. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, you just summarized it. Thank you.
Great job, Sheena.
Thank
Thank you,
you.
Sheena. Woo!